So if you like that ending above the other one, what we're going to have you do is just quickly mark through those last couple lines and just rewrite what he said, and we'll be set up perfectly. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, so our next reader is Kelly Ruxer. She lives in Austin with her family and specifically, for instance, her dogs. That's an important part of her life on here. So if you can come up here, Kelly, and read your piece, please. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to be starting about halfway down on page 59 in the book. Just a little setup, because my short story is kind of long. I'm reading just a chunk of it. My story is about this rather pathetic individual who's a traveling salesman. He's on planes all the time. He goes coast to coast selling motorized window shades to the wealthy. And he decides that he's going to hit on a very beautiful woman that's in his row on this particular flight. But his job always sounds really boring, and so he decides he's going to lie to her. And he's going to tell her that he's a doctor. And they get about an hour into the flight, and she's not falling for his ruse. He's doing a rather terrible job at lying about it. And there's a call that goes out overhead for the need of a physician, and she hits the call light. And it becomes this kind of standoff between the two of them. Is he going to throw himself into this situation or not? And he ends up getting ushered up to the front of the plane where this woman is in labor. She has hidden her own pregnancy wanting to fly, and she's very advanced, and now they're going to have him assess her to try to figure out whether they're going to turn the plane around or not. So it's called The Calling. Beckman felt his stomach clench as she handed the case off to him. The giant red plus sign across the front glared up at him accusingly as he set it in the aisle and opened it up. He studied the case's inventory slowly, first picking up one plastic wrap gadget, then another, his mind racing for what would be his next move. He encountered a set of latex gloves, and he chose those as a starting point. Slapping first the left one on, then the right, he held them up awkwardly in the air as he had seen doctors on the television shows do countless times before they began some life-saving procedure. Then he recognized a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. Had he not been subject to countless blood pressure examinations his entire life, with every single visit to a doctor's office? How hard could it be? He took these items and moved into the row toward Mrs. Kittredge, thinking about other bits of dialogue he could glean from the television medical dramas. "So," he began casually, "how far apart are your contractions?" 10 minutes apart, she replied, holding out her left arm to him, "and pretty regular." Beckman froze at the word minutes while putting on the blood pressure cuff, his mind going into a tailspin. Minutes did not sound like a whole lot of time. Were these things always timed in minutes? Was 10 minutes a lot? A little? What if she decided to drop that kid right there? Could he pull it off? How hard could it be? Once during a long layover in Atlanta, he had flipped through an abandoned Cosmopolitan magazine, the cover of a barely clothed Scarlett Johansson overcoming any scruple he may have had otherwise possessed over conspicuously consuming a woman's fashion magazine in public. He had come across an article which described a phenomenon of natural childbirth, in which the laboring mother would just sort of go into a zone of pure mental and physical instinctuality and control, simply knowing what to do. All one had to do as the doctor was go all Johnny Bench in that situation and catch the kid as it came out. His head spun on the possibility for a moment, and then he resumed wrapping the cuff around her arm. "I think you're putting that on inside out," Mrs. Kittredge observed as he struggled to secure the cuff in place. He flipped it over and noticed the helpful band of Velcro. He felt the tips of his ears redden in mute embarrassment. "And don't you need the ear thingies?" his patient pointed out as he began to squeeze the bulb attached to the cuff. "Right," Beckman chuckled awkwardly. He could feel Karina's eyes boring into the back of his head. "I guess I'm a bit rusty." He smiled and shook his head in mild self-deprecation. "Usually I have my nurses do this sort of thing." He quietly congratulated himself on that face save and put the earpieces and stethoscope to his ears. He raised the bell to his mouth and said, "Testing," and then yanked the earpieces out as the shock of his own magnified voice exploded into his ears. He glanced around at the others awkwardly, just making sure they work. He put the earpieces back in and then looked at her chest. There was a precise spot for the bell of the stethoscope in this process, he was sure, but he had never paid much attention while having his own pressure taken. He was usually too busy chatting up the pretty nurse to notice what she was doing. He placed the bell down awkwardly onto the woman's left breast and resumed squeezing the bulb. That's my boob, Mrs. Kittredge said, looking down at the stethoscope. Not sure what you think you're going to hear there. Without reply, Beckman slid the bell between her breasts and was relieved to encounter the ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum of her beating heart. For a long while, he was enthralled. He recalled those moments as a young boy when he would climb onto his own mother's lap and press his ear to her chest. She smelled of cinnamon and lavender, and the fabric of her polyester dress would graze his cheek as he nuzzled in. She would wrap her arms around his tiny bird-like frame and squeeze, the sounds of a beating heart filling his ears, with something that stirred a deep feeling of, even to his young soul, nostalgia and déjà vu. On his mother's lap, he had felt welcome, safe, reassured by a renewed connection of two bodies that used to be one. How long had it been since he had known such satisfaction, such rightness about where he was and who held him close? Week after week, he floated 30,000 feet above the ground, and yet always had to fight against the sensation of sinking. Each week, he sat packed in with his fellow human beings in a forced proximity necessitated by an airline industry's hunger for the profit margins proffered by the method of shuttling back and forth humans as cargo, not as customers, not as people with hopes and needs. And then there were his customers, homeowners of a certain tax bracket who paid thousands of dollars per window to shut out the sun, the air, their neighbors, with the ease of a button on a wall, a remote control, or for those with a prodigious interior decorating budget, a single voice command. The word down would cause a motor to spin, so quiet a motor, so gentle, that over it one can hear the beating of one's own heart and cocoon one in darkness and solitude. What was he doing here? What was he doing with his life, crisscrossing the sky in a monotonous, never-ending pursuit of what exactly? Sales numbers? Recognition? Someone to once again wrap her arms around him in a connection of two bodies into one? Absent-mindedly, his thoughts navigated all of this as he squeezed and squeezed and squeezed the bowl, mesmerized by the gentle, warm throbbing of the heart. Oh, geez, what are you doing? Beckman was yanked suddenly from his reveries by the loud cries of Mrs. Kittredge, her lower arm now a dark red. That's way too tight, she snapped. He glanced down frantically at the gauge on the cuff and saw the needle hovering over the number 260. Sorry, he mumbled, and fumbled with the metal knob attached to the bulb. A gentle hiss escaped as the cuff began to deflate. He watched the red needle counting down, looking for anything that might tell him what her pressure was, but all it did was descend to zero. He looked up at the others.